The council chamber of the Galactic Concord hummed with the kind of tension only bureaucrats could conjure, a mix between a funeral and a wine tasting. In the center, a holographic projection of Xylo-7 rotated slowly, like a threatening disco ball. Around it sat ambassadors from the galaxy's myriad of species, each one uglier and more disdainful than the last. At least it wasn't a beauty contest, because humans would have won that by default. Lyra Farrows, the human ambassador with a perpetual smirk and the patience of a caffeinated squirt, lounged in her chair at the far end of the oval table. She looked as though she belonged there, which was a lie so big it could have had its own gravitational pull. The first to speak was Ambassador Gractal of the Zinx Collective, a species famous for their inability to comprehend humor. He rose, a gray-skinned figure with more tentacles than a bureaucrat had red tape, and cleared his throat, a sound like a blender full of marbles. Honorable representatives, Gractal began, his voice a monotone drone that could lull a hyperactive child to sleep. We gathered to discuss a most perplexing anomaly. The sentient planet, Xylo-7, has shown unusual resilience to our efforts to colonize and control it. More concerning, the humans have not only survived but appear to thrive. Lyra raised an eyebrow, her subtle cue that someone was about to hear something they wouldn't like. Thriving might be a stretch, Grack. We're surviving in the same way cockroaches survive a nuclear winter, against all common sense and sanity. A chittering sound came from the other side of the table, where Ambassador Blix of the Torgax Empire, a species resembling oversized armadillos with a bad case of mange, leaned forward. Survival is irrelevant to the agenda. The question is why your species has not been eradicated by Xylo-7's defenses like the others. Lyra shrugged, a gesture that somehow conveyed both indifference and superiority. Maybe Xylo-7 likes our cooking, or maybe it just has a soft spot for underdogs. Gractal's tentacles flailed slightly, a Zinxian gesture of frustration or perhaps indigestion. Underdogs are irrelevant. Xylo-7 is a sentient being. It should recognize threats and neutralize them, yet humanity persists. That's humans for you, Lyra said, leaning back as if the chair were a throne, persistent as a bad rash. The chamber echoed with a sound that, among the Torgax, passed for laughter. Blix bared its teeth in what might have been a smile or a threat, hard to tell with Torgax. Your species is an anomaly, Ambassador Farrows. An unexpected variable in the equation of conquest. Lyra's smile widened, exposing teeth that could have been weapons given the right context. You say anomaly, I say life of the party. Maybe Xylo-7 just needed some new dance partners. A murmur of discomfort rippled through the gathered dignitaries. Humor was as foreign to them as a tax refund, and they treated it with the same suspicion. Crix, a Xylobian diplomat whose appearance was best described as flamboyant jellyfish, pulsated with light. The concern remains. Humanity's presence disrupts the delicate balance we seek to maintain across the quadrant. Lyra's eyes glinted with something dangerous. You mean the balance where you folks play God and the rest of us are supposed to kneel and be grateful? Sorry if we're not reading from the same hymn sheet. At this, a murmur of something akin to agreement, or at least acknowledgement, passed among the more open-minded of the representatives. The Galactic Concord's attempts to enforce peace through subjugation were as popular as a summer cold. Gractal's voice cut through the noise, cold and unwavering. Ambassador Farrows, this council needs answers. The survival of your people on Xylo-7 poses a threat to galactic stability. Lyra leaned forward, her posture suddenly all business. You want answers? Fine. Humans are good at adapting. We're the cockroaches of the universe. Resilient, annoying, impossible to get rid of. And maybe, just maybe, we've figured out how to make friends with Xylo-7. There was a collective intake of breath, or equivalent gaseous exchange from the non-breathing species. Making friends with a sentient planet was like befriending a hurricane, not impossible, just incredibly stupid. Blix's voice was skeptical. Are you suggesting diplomacy with a planet? Why not? Lyra said, a twinkle of mischief in her eyes. We've talked our way out of worse situations. And besides, it's not like Xylo-7 is hosting tea parties. It's sentient, sure, but it's also stubborn as hell. Maybe it just needed someone to say hello. The chamber fell silent, the kind of silence that usually preceded a decision no one was going to like. The other ambassadors exchanged glances, a silent communication that transcended language and possibly morality. Crix's lights flickered contemplatively. If humans can communicate with Xylo-7, it may prove beneficial to the Concord, or disastrous, Gractyl interjected. Consider the implications if humans gain control or influence over Xylo-7. Lyra laughed, a sharp, cutting sound. Control. Influence? We're just trying not to get eaten, Grack. If that's influence, then maybe you should reevaluate your strategy manuals. The representatives shuffled uncomfortably, and Lyra could see the wheels turning, slowly, rustily, in their bureaucratic minds. The thought of humans somehow taming Xylo-7 was terrifying, and yet here they were, alive and kicking. Ambassador Pharaohs, Blix finally said, the Council must assess the threat you pose to our plans for Xylo-7. Your cooperation is essential. Lyra leaned back, folding her arms with a casual defiance that spoke volumes. Cooperation's not a problem, Blix, but maybe it's time you folks start seeing humans as partners, not pests. We're not going anywhere, and neither is Xylo-7. With that, the meeting adjourned, the representatives dispersing like shadows at sunrise, leaving Lyra alone with her thoughts and the ever-rotating image of Xylo-7. As she left the chamber, she couldn't help but chuckle at the thought of the Council's discomfort. Humans, thriving in the galaxy's most inhospitable corners, were proof that sometimes the universe just needed a good laugh or a solid punchline. The corridors of the Concord echoed with the footsteps of the discontented and the disillusioned, and Lyra moved through them like a ghost, her mind already plotting the next move in the game of survival. Because if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was turning the cosmic joke of their existence into a full-blown comedy routine. And Xylo-7, well, it was the punchline that kept the whole galaxy waiting with bated breath. The council chamber was clearing out, the representatives slithering, clattering, and shuffling their way back to wherever they kept their egos when not on display. Lyra lingered, enjoying the way the holographic Xylo-7 spun like it had all the time in the universe. It probably did, maybe more than the humans anyway. Gractyl's voice cut through the air like a rusty saw. Ambassador Pharaohs, a moment of your time. Lyra spun around, finding Gractyl's tentacles curling in what she assumed was an attempt at professionalism. Grack, if I didn't know better, I'd say you were starting to like me. The Zinx ambassador's expression didn't change, probably because it couldn't. Their faces were as expressive as a brick wall. I am intrigued by your comment about making friends with Xylo-7. Explain. Lyra leaned against the table, her smirk growing. Well, Grack, in human terms, you could say Xylo-7 and I had a little heart-to-heart. Blix rolled up beside them, scales clacking like poorly maintained machinery. Are you suggesting the planet is responsive to emotional interaction? Not exactly, Lyra replied. More like it's responsive to a bit of culinary cleverness. Gractyl's tentacles paused mid-flail. Culinary. You attempted to communicate with Xylo-7 through food. Oh, not just any food, Lyra said, eyes gleaming with mischief. Human food. The stuff that'll stick to your ribs and keep you going through the worst hangover of your life. You see, Xylo-7's natural defenses make most of its flora and fauna toxic to outsiders. But to us. Just a culinary challenge. Blix's scales shifted in what Lyra guessed was confusion. You modified the planet's biology. Modified is a strong word, Blix. More like we tweaked the recipes. Lyra chuckled. Turns out, with the right touch, that same toxic sludge makes a killer barbecue sauce. Crix, who'd lingered near the exit, floated closer, its bioluminescent body flickering in shades of confusion and disbelief. You have weaponized joy, Lyra shrugged. I wouldn't call it weaponizing, more like exploiting. Joy is a survival mechanism for us. A bit of joy makes the hardships worth it. Keeps the mind sharp, the spirit willing. Gractol's voice was incredulous. Joy is not a tactic. That's where you're wrong, Squid Face. Joy's the one thing that's kept us crawling through millennia of bad decisions and worse luck. Lyra gave a theatrical sigh. And it just so happens that joy in this case involves making edible the inedible. Blix regarded her with newfound interest. And how did you present this? Joy to Xylo-7 through our sheer stubbornness naturally. She grinned. It started with a cautious nibble on some of the local foliage. Next thing you know, we were deep-frying everything that moved or didn't move fast enough. Crix's lights dimmed to a contemplative hue. And this altered the planet's defense mechanisms. You could say it took some time, Lyra added. We had to convince Xylo-7 we weren't just another bunch of intergalactic pests here to strip mine its carcass. Turns out, showing a bit of appreciation got us a long way. Gractol's tentacles twitched skeptically. Appreciation, Lyra nodded. Yeah, appreciation. We didn't just take, we reciprocated. Left a few things behind. Some seeds of our own, if you catch my drift. Blix's eyes narrowed. This is unprecedented, it's called adapting, Lyra replied. You folks are all about control, but humans, we're about making the best of a bad situation. Hell, we thrive on it. A silence descended over the group, the kind that usually signaled they were contemplating something unsavory, or in this case, something wildly unexpected. Could this be replicated? Crix asked, its luminescence brightening with curiosity. Probably not, Lyra said, unless you've got a few centuries of bad decisions and dumb luck under your belt. Humanity's secret sauce, if you will. Gractol's voice was tight, like a noose pulled a bit too hard. The Council will require further study into this. Development. Study all you like, Lyra said, turning to leave. Just don't be surprised if you end up with a taste for barbecue. As she walked away, she couldn't suppress a grin. The galaxy's most buttoned-up bureaucrats, baffled by humanity's penchant for turning obstacles into appetizers. She'd love to see the expression on their faces when they realized that sometimes, just sometimes, optimism and a healthy sense of humor were the best weapons of all. Outside the chamber, the corridors were a maze of sterile hallways and indifferent steel. Lyra navigated them with the ease of someone who'd been lost in worse places. As she moved, her calm link buzzed against her wrist. Lyra came a voice that was both familiar and irritatingly chipper. You're still alive. Barely, Jax, she replied, not breaking stride. How are things planetside? Jax, her most reliable, albeit annoying, contact on Xylo-7 chuckled. Well, the roast beast was a hit. We might have a new local delicacy on our hands. Good to hear, Lyra said. The Council's in a twist over our survival tactics. They can't decide if we're genius or just lucky. Lucky, Jax said without hesitation. But genius if you ask the right questions. Flattery will get you nowhere, Lyra scoffed. Except maybe an extra ration of that beast. Keep your promises, and I might keep you posted on the planet's mood swings, Jax teased. As the comm link went silent, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that humans were onto something. While the galaxy's other species scrabbled for control, humanity had stumbled onto survival through camaraderie and a surprising amount of deep-fried perseverance. She entered her quarters, a sparse room that was more function than form, and flopped onto her bunk. The ceiling, a dull gray slab, was comforting in its blandness. Here, away from the prying eyes and judgmental glares, she could ponder the implications of what had transpired. Xylo-7, a sentient planet, had found an unlikely ally in the cockroach-like stubbornness of humans. It was a partnership as improbable as it was effective. And as for the rest of the galaxy, well, they just have to get used to the idea that sometimes joy and stubbornness were as powerful as any weapon. Lyra's thoughts drifted, the exhaustion of diplomacy and survival weighing heavy, but before sleep claimed her, a final, irreverent thought bubbled up. In the grand scheme of things, perhaps it wasn't humanity that had found a home on Xylo-7. Maybe, just maybe, Xylo-7 had found a home in humanity's endless capacity to adapt, endure, and find humor in the most unlikely places. And that, she mused with a sleepy smirk, was one hell of a cosmic joke. Lyra strolled into the lab area that the humans had carved out of the planet, a place that looked like a second-hand electronics store exploded, and they decided to call it home. She found her team of scientists huddled around a table, arguing over something that looked suspiciously like a blender attached to a mass spectrometer. Dr. Finnegan, a wiry man with the perpetual air of someone who'd just had a brilliant idea or forgotten to turn the stove off, was in the middle of a heated debate with Muriel, the biochemist who could probably use her sarcasm as a weapon if the need arose. The rest of the team watched like spectators at a sporting event. "You're telling me this thing," Muriel poked the contraption with a disdain that suggested she thought it should be on trial for treason, "is going to help us analyze how joy affects the local ecosystem." "Joy," said Finnegan, waving his hands like a magician unveiling his best trick, "is just a complex neurochemical response. We can measure the chemical pathways it influences in Xylo-7's biology. Ergo, this thing is our key." Lyra chuckled as she leaned against the doorway, crossing her arms. "Ah, science. The only field where you can say ergo and somehow not sound like a pretentious ass." Finnegan shot her a grin. "Glad you could join us, oh fearless leader." "Care to weigh in?" "Just here to soak in the brilliance," Lyra said, "and maybe ensure we don't accidentally blow up a continent." Muriel snorted. "With Finnegan's track record, that's a real possibility." "Hey," Finnegan protested, "I once made a nuclear reactor out of a toaster oven and some chewing gum." "Yes," Muriel rolled her eyes, "and we're still not allowed back on that space station." Before Finnegan could defend his dubious achievements further, the comm link crackled to life with a message from Gractol. The Zinx ambassador's voice had the enthusiasm of a death march. "Ambassador Farrows, the Council requests an update on the biochemical analysis." Lyra sighed. "Fantastic. Everyone's a critic." She pressed the comm button. "Grack, give me one good reason I should care what the Council thinks." "Because they are threatening sanctions against the human colony if adequate explanations are not provided," Gractol replied, his tone as dry as a desert. Lyra sighed. "Sanctions? Oh no, how will we ever cope without the joy of intergalactic red tape and bureaucratic nonsense?" "Lyra, darling," Finnegan muttered, "let's not poke the bear while it's already contemplating mauling us." She nodded reluctantly. "Fine, Grack. Tell them they'll have their answers soon. And if they are lucky, I might even draw them a pretty picture." The comm went silent and Lyra turned back to her team. "All right, folks, let's figure out how to translate joy into something the Council can understand. Preferably before they decide to quarantine us. Why do we work with aliens who think emotions are just bad cologne?" Muriel asked, gathering some data pads. "Job security," Lyra replied. "If they ever figure out empathy, we'd all be out of work." While the team got to work, Lyra took a moment to ponder the scale of their predicament. If only she'd known that her resume would one day include negotiating with sentient planets and exasperated alien councils, she might have paid more attention in those diplomacy classes. Meanwhile, the Council was having a collective heart attack over the latest reports on Xylo-7. They'd commissioned their best analysts to decipher the human strategy, which was akin to putting a dog in charge of a physics exam. Representatives from various species, each uglier than the last, some wearing their paranoia like a fashionable hat, crowded into a room that was designed to discourage cooperation with its actively uncomfortable chairs. "Humans have always been unpredictable," one representative, who resembled a sentient cabbage with a monocle, grumbled. "But this is beyond the pale." The Zinx ambassador, Gractol, regarded the holographic Xylo-7 spinning in the center of the room, a grumpy disco ball. "Their methods are unorthodox, but they have survived where others have failed. Maybe it's not just survival, suggested Blix, his scales rattling in contemplation. Perhaps they're actually thriving, snorted another representative, with eyes on stalks that twitched in disbelief. On a planet that eats most sentient life for breakfast. I'll believe that when my third stomach learns to waltz. Gractol's voice was thoughtful, like a philosopher contemplating the meaning of life or why they'd ever left the comfort of their watery planet. Perhaps there is something to their emotional approach, a dangerous precedent, the cabbage-like delegate interjected. If other species started using emotions as a tactic, the very fabric of intergalactic relations could unravel. Blix's voice took on a thoughtful cadence. Or we might learn something valuable. The room erupted in a chorus of dissent, the noise level akin to a particularly enthusiastic auction. Emotions, it seemed, were not on the Council's list of approved weapons of mass cooperation. Back on Xylo-7, the research team was making headway, albeit the kind of headway one might make while blindfolded in a minefield. Muriel stared at a display filled with endless scrolling data, her fingers flying over the console. So we're detecting increased serotonin levels in the local plant life following exposure to human activities. Finnegan looked up, intrigued. The planet's getting happy vibes from us, Muriel shrugged. Either that or it's plotting to take us all out with a smile. Happiness as sabotage, Lyra mused. Now there's a tactic I'd like to see the Council wrap their heads around, and what about us? Finnegan asked, his tone half serious. Are we going to survive this roller coaster of mood-enhanced botany? Lyra grinned. As long as the plants don't start asking for therapy, I think we'll be all right. The room filled with a mix of nervous laughter and genuine mirth, a testament to the resilience, if not recklessness, of humanity's finest minds. All right, everyone, Lyra said, pulling focus back to the task at hand. Let's gather these findings and prepare to present them. If we can convince the Council that joy is more than just a marketing term, we might buy ourselves some breathing room, or at least postpone the inevitable witch hunt, Muriel added dryly. Optimism, Muriel, Lyra replied with a wink. It's a survival mechanism. As the team turned back to their work with renewed vigor, Lyra felt a flicker of hope. This strange alchemy of science, luck, and a bit of humor might just lead to something worthwhile. In the council chamber, the mood was tense, like a particularly constipated buffalo. Representatives shifted uneasily in their seats while Gractol delivered the latest update from Xylo-7. Preliminary findings suggest that human activities have a biochemical effect on Xylo-7's ecosystem, Gractol explained in his best dispassionate monotone. The planet appears to respond positively to human presence. A chorus of skepticism filled the chamber like a disgruntled choir, and we're supposed to believe they've achieved this with happiness. The sentient cabbage asked, incredulous. I'm not suggesting we fully understand it yet, Gractol conceded, but we cannot dismiss the possibility that emotional interactions play a role. Blix leaned forward, scales clinking softly. Perhaps this warrants a deeper investigation into emotional intelligence as a survival strategy. Ridiculous. Another ambassador sneered. Next, you'll be suggesting we host a galactic hugfest. Gractol's tentacles fluttered impatiently. Whether we like it or not, the humans have survived, and their methods deserve scrutiny. The cabbage delegate continued to sputter, but Blix, now deep in thought, interrupted. We've been trying to conquer this planet with force and science, yet perhaps we've overlooked a crucial element, partnership with a celestial body. The eye-stalked ambassador laughed. What's next? T-part is with black holes. Blix ignored the snide remark. If Xylo-7 responds to humans, it suggests a symbiotic potential. We must consider the implications. And if we don't, asked Gractol. Then we risk the humans mastering something we've ignored, Blix replied. And if they succeed, it may shift the balance of power. The room fell silent as the consequences of such a possibility settled over them, as heavy as a black hole in a teacup. Back in the confines of the human lab, Lyra and her ragtag crew were deep in preparation. They'd have to present their findings not just as data, but as a narrative the Council might actually understand, or at least not dismiss outright. "Think we can teach these aliens a thing or two about joy?" Finnegan asked, adjusting the settings on their makeshift analyzer. Lyra smirked. "If we can teach them that, we might just teach them to laugh." Muriel rolled her eyes. "You're aiming high, Lyra. But if anyone can do it, we might be the fools for the job." "Amen to that," Lyra said, full of confidence laced with sarcasm. As they finalized their presentation, Lyra felt the weight of the galaxy's scrutiny. They weren't just trying to survive on a hostile planet. They were attempting to redefine the parameters of existence. Whether it was reckless or ingenious, only time would tell. For now, they had a council to convince and a sentient planet that seemed to like them just a little bit more than the rest of the universe. It was a start, and in the grimdark vastness of space, sometimes a start was all you needed. With a final glance at her team, Lyra took a deep breath. "All right, let's go spread some joy and maybe a little chaos. It's what humans do best, after all." Lyra paced the cramped lab like a tiger in a zoo exhibit, if that tiger was slightly tipsy and had a penchant for sarcasm. Her team had become something of an oddball family, each of them orbiting the chaos that was Xylo-7 with varying degrees of enthusiasm and dread. They needed their report ready for the council before someone decided to test the theory that humans were edible. "All right, folks," she announced, "let's make sure our presentation doesn't look like it was cobbled together by a group of caffeinated toddlers." She paused, letting her gaze rest on Muriel. "Which means no more sarcastic footnotes, Muriel." Muriel raised her hands in mock surrender. "What? The universe is a joke. I'm just pointing out the punchlines." Finnegan leaned over a contraption that looked suspiciously like it was plotting its own escape. "I'm more worried about whether this thing's gonna blow before we figure out if joy really is contagious." "Joy's like a virus," Lyra said. "Catchy, but with fewer runny noses." "Or more," Finnegan added, nodding at the mass of wires and metal that was their joy analyzer. "Depends on how much of this leaks." The room shared a chuckle, the kind of laugh you make when you're convinced you might just be laughing into the abyss. In the corner, Crix was observing their antics with the kind of disbelief usually reserved for magic shows and political campaigns. "I still can't quite grasp this concept of joy," Crix admitted, his bioluminescent skin shifting to a confused blue. "It sounds uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable is our baseline, Crix," Lyra replied. "Anything else is just a bonus." As they worked, the lab's door slid open with a reluctant hiss, revealing Gractal. His entrance was about as welcome as a tax audit, but at least he wasn't there to hand out fines. "The council is growing impatient," Gractal announced, his voice as lively as a monotone metronome. "They've scheduled a review of your findings." "Great," Lyra muttered. "Nothing like an intergalactic grilling to brighten the day." Gractal's eyes, if you could call them that, flicked to the side. "Be advised, there are factions within the council who see your survival as a threat rather than a curiosity." "Fantastic," Muriel said, not even bothering to hide her disdain. "Because what we needed was less support and more jealous politicians." Blix clacked his way into the conversation, curiosity piqued. "Some fear your influence may destabilize existing alliances. They wonder what you might do if given too much." "Freedom." Lyra leaned against the console, arms crossed. "Freedom's a funny concept, Blix. Everyone loves it until someone else has more of it, or when it threatens to make the status quo look obsolete," Finnegan added, not lifting his eyes from the display. "But surely open dialogue would," Crix started. "Open dialogue only works if everyone's listening," Lyra interrupted. "And if you've sat through one of these council meetings, you know most of them are just waiting for their turn to talk." The tension in the room was thicker than the protein sludge they called food. Adjustments were made, and just when they were about to begin their practice presentation, the lights flickered. Not the usual kind of flicker, but the one reminiscent of every horror movie right before the monster makes its entrance. "What now?" Muriel asked, massaging her temples. "Either the power grid's having a seizure or someone's been tampering with our systems," Finnegan said, running his fingers over the controls. "Sabotage?" Lyra asked, her voice low and dangerously calm. "Grak, is this your doing?" Grakdol's tentacles twitched in what might have been a gesture of denial. "Not I. But there are those within the council who might consider." "Less scrupulous means perfect," Lyra groaned, rolling her eyes. "The only thing worse than bureaucracy is bureaucracy that thinks it's clever." Crix blinked, an odd gesture when performed by a bioluminescent creature. "What will you do?" "Improvise," Lyra said, clapping her hands together. "Humans are good at that. It's our defining trait, right after sarcasm and poor decision-making." "Finnegan, get those systems back online," Muriel ordered, her tone brooking no argument. "We're not letting a bunch of paranoid diplomats ruin our shot at interstellar fame, or at least keeping us off the menu," Finnegan muttered, diving into the tangle of wires like a man possessed. Luckily, Finnegan's almost supernatural ability to fix things kicked in, and soon the lights steadied, the lab humming back to life like an old engine reluctantly deciding to start. With that hurdle temporarily cleared, the team refocused on their presentation, even as the reality of internal sabotage kept them glancing over their shoulders. "Let's finish this up before someone decides to send us a welcome gift of exploding fruit baskets," Lyra said, a grin tugging at her lips despite the circumstances. As they continued their work, a faint buzzing started in the walls, like a chorus of particularly angry bees. Lyra frowned, exchanging glances with her team. "Let me guess," she said. "That's not a good thing." "Depends," Finnegan replied. "Do you like high-frequency tones and sudden combustion?" They traced the sound to a small, innocuous device hidden beneath one of the consoles. It looked like the kind of tech you'd find at a garage sale organized by mad scientists. "Sabotage confirmed," Muriel said, plucking the device from its hiding spot. "This thing's a little Trojan horse, designed to make our systems think they've gone sentient. Someone's trying to make us look like we're running blind," Blix observed, his scales rattling with tension. "If they can discredit your findings, the council will dismiss you." "Great." "Just great," Lyra said, her sarcasm wrapping around the words like a comforting blanket. "What's next?" "Poisoning our rations. I'd suggest we don't give them any ideas," Finnegan said, taking the device and deactivating it with a few deft movements. "Then we've got to assume they won't stop here," Lyra continued. "We've become a threat, and threats need to be neutralized." "Enter human ingenuity," Muriel said, her tone a mix of sarcasm and determination. Lyra nodded, her mind racing. "We'll need to think 2 steps ahead. If they want to play dirty, we'll match them move for move." Grakdol, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "Your position has become precarious. The council may not be willing to listen." "They'll listen," Lyra said, her eyes hard, "or they'll wish they had." With the device neutralized, they reconvened, a new plan forming. If they couldn't count on the council to play fair, they'd have to show them what unfair really looked like. It was time to lean into humanity's most notorious reputation, resourcefulness in the face of utter stupidity and danger. "Let's turn this to our advantage," Lyra said, a fire in her eyes that promised chaos. "We'll make this sabotage work for us." "How?" Crix asked, his skin shifting to a questioning yellow. Lyra grinned. "By doing what we do best, taking a bad situation and making it worse for someone else." They started by creating decoys, systems that appeared vulnerable but were actually traps for any more sabotage attempts. Finnegan rigged the lab with surprises that'd make any saboteur think twice about interfering again. Meanwhile, Muriel and Blix worked on fine-tuning their data, ensuring that even if their systems went down, they'd have a hard copy ready to present. "We're betting on the fact that our saboteurs think we're too naive to catch on," Lyra explained. "We'll let them think they're winning. Then we'll pull the rug out from under them." The plan was risky, borderline crazy, which made it perfect in Lyra's book. As the team worked, the tension in the air seemed to crackle, a mix of fear and anticipation. "Remember, folks," Lyra said, her voice carrying a grim edge, "we're not just proving a point to the Council. We're showing everyone that humanity might be the underdog, but we're the underdog with teeth. Let's just hope our teeth don't get knocked out in the process," Finnegan quipped, pulling another wire from the contraption, his focus unwavering. Time flew by in a blur of wires, data pads, and sarcastic banter. The deadline loomed ever closer, and with it, the promise of either vindication or disaster. Finally, as the last pieces fell into place, Lyra called the team together. "All right, presentations ready. Let's dazzle them with our brilliance or at least blind them with our incompetence." "Sounds like a plan," Muriel said, grinning. As they prepared to face the Council, Lyra couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. They'd been underestimated, targeted, and cornered, yet still they stood, defiant and ready to face whatever came next. They might be the galaxy's scrappy newcomers, but they had a trick or two left to play. As they left the lab, heading towards the Council chamber, Lyra glanced at Gractal. "Think they'll buy what we're selling?" Gractal's tentacles fluttered in what might have been amusement. "If not, it will be entertaining to watch them try to comprehend it. I'll take entertaining over a firing squad any day," Lyra replied, a wry smile on her face. As they approached the chamber, the weight of the task ahead settled over them. They were about to step into a den of politics and intrigue, armed only with a plan and a lot of attitude. But then, attitude had gotten them this far. Why not a little further? "Let's go show them what humanity's made of," she said, pushing open the doors. Inside, the Council waited like vultures eyeing their next meal. But Lyra and her team were ready. It was time to take the stage in this cosmic theater, and if there was one thing humans were good at, it was stealing the show. Lyra Farrows leaned back in her chair inside the Galactic Concord Council chamber, a room that had all the warmth of a morgue and the charm of a dentist's waiting room. The representatives droned on, their voices blending into an indecipherable hum, like a swarm of bees that had taken up law as a hobby. She was supposed to be paying attention, but her mind kept wandering back to Xylo-7 and the ticking time bomb her team was desperately trying to defuse. "Ambassador Farrows, are we boring you?" The question cut through her thoughts like a rusty saw, pulling her back into the room. It was Counselor Drell, a man who had all the charisma of a damp sock. Lyra flashed him her best diplomatic smile, which looked a bit like a shark deciding if it was still hungry. "Oh no, Counselor Drell. I'm just enthralled by the riveting debate on whether our planet should be classified as inhospitable or slightly less inhospitable." There was a smattering of chuckles around the room. No one liked Drell, not even his own mother, rumor had it. Lyra's irreverence was as close as this place got to entertainment. As the meeting dragged on, her communicator buzzed. She glanced at it under the table, a message from Muriel. "Supplies down to a week. Planet's throwing more tantrums. Great," she muttered under her breath. "Just what we needed, something to share with the class." Drell piped up again, his beady eyes narrowing. "Just checking on the weather reports on Xylo-7, Lyra replied smoothly. "Turns out it's a bit hostile today like every other day." "Well, maybe if you and your team weren't so insistent on poking the proverbial bear," Drell remarked. "Nose so high up he might as well have been sniffing the next galaxy over." Lyra rolled her eyes. "Poking's what we humans do best, Counselor. Otherwise, we'd still be sitting in caves wondering what that big bright thing in the sky is." The meeting finally ended, a mercy killing to an otherwise torturous affair. Lyra strode out, making a beeline back to the lab, where the rest of her team was surely knee-deep in chaos. When she arrived, she found the place in a state of organized pandemonium. Devices beeped in protest, screens flickered like they were auditioning for a horror movie, and the faint smell of burnt electronics lingered in the air. "Report," she demanded, stalking into the room like a general surveying a battlefield. "Planet's pulling out all the stops," Finnegan said, his fingers flying over a console. "Hallucinations, sudden storms, disappearing landmarks." It's like it's trying to win Xylo-7's Got Talent for most creative murder attempts. Blix's scales clattered as he nervously checked another monitor. We've also got some lovely new flora that seems to enjoy the taste of metal. It's been munching on our equipment. Perfect, Lyra quipped. Because what we really needed was a sentient salad bar. Muriel handed her a data pad. We're low on food, low on morale, and as of this morning the bathroom's out of order. So, things are going swimmingly. Nothing says end of days like a clogged toilet, Lyra sighed, scanning the report. All right, folks, we may be the underdog, but we're scrappy. Let's see if we can't turn this disaster into just a regular bad day. Crix, standing in the corner with his bioluminescent skin cycling through shades of confusion, asked, "Why doesn't the council assist more?" "Because they're politicians, Crix," Muriel explained, not unkindly. "And helping doesn't win them any points unless there's a parade involved. Besides," Lyra added, "they'd rather watch us squirm and hope we figure it out. Then they can take credit when it all stops blowing up in our faces, which is a generous if," Finnegan muttered, twisting a wrench as if it owed him money. Lyra took a moment, allowing her team's banter to fill the room with a semblance of normalcy. It was in this chaos that they thrived, as much as one could thrive on a planet actively trying to evict them. "All right, let's focus," Lyra said. "We need to figure out how to get Xylo-7 to stop throwing its tantrums long enough for us to finish our study. Have we tried asking it nicely?" Blix suggested, his tone only half joking. "Not yet," Lyra replied, "but I'll take it under advisement." "Right after we try a stern talking to and maybe a timeout," Finnegan chuckled. "As long as we don't end up in the corner, too." They worked late into the night, the only soundtrack the hum of machinery and the occasional curse as someone bumped into something sharp or hot. It was a symphony of sorts, the music of desperation and ingenuity played by a ragtag orchestra of misfits. Finally, as they brewed their umpteenth pot of caffeine, because sleep was a luxury none of them could afford, Muriel spoke up. "What if we're missing something? What if there's a way to speak its language?" "Flora and fauna are the language," Blix said. "But it's all toxic, not to us though," Lyra pointed out. "We're the anomaly. Maybe we're the key." Crix's skin shifted to a thoughtful shade of blue. "You believe human emotion interacts with the planet? It's a theory," Lyra said, shrugging. "And right now, we're desperate enough to try anything short of sacrificing a goat. Shame." "I was just starting to like goat cheese," Finnegan said, deadpan. They decided to focus on this thread, exploring whether their emotions, specifically joy, had a measurable impact. It was as scientific as a seance, but at this point the scientific method had become more of a suggestion than a rule. "Let's get some joy in here," Lyra announced, clapping her hands. "Fake it till you make it, people." Her team gave her a round of strained smiles, the kind that belonged on a hang in their poster. But they complied, sharing stories, jokes, and memories, trying to flood the lab with genuine laughter. "Remember that time Finnegan tried to build a reactor out of kitchenware?" Muriel said, giggling. "I maintain it was a brilliant idea," Finnegan replied, feigning indignation. "Until the spoons melted, or when Crix tried to understand sarcasm and nearly short-circuited his translator," Blix added. "I am still learning," Crix admitted, his skin glowing sheepishly. Bit by bit the atmosphere lightened, and their joy analyzer lit up, humming as it registered something on its dials. The holographic projection of Xylo-7 spun lazily, casting an eerie disco ball glow that seemed almost cheerful in the dim lab. "Well, that's something," Lyra noted, watching the readings change. "It's reacting. Maybe we're onto something, or we're about to have the most upbeat ending to a tragic story," Muriel quipped. They continued, the night stretching out, the lines between hope and madness blurring. But that was the trick, wasn't it? To stare into the abyss and refuse to blink first. Finally, as dawn, or whatever passed for dawn on this cursed rock, approached, Lyra called a halt. "All right, team, let's get some rest. We'll face the council later today and see if we can't charm them into giving us more time." As they dispersed, Crix lingered. "You seem resilient." Lyra shrugged, tired but still defiant. Humans are great at bouncing back, like cockroaches but with better hair. Crix blinked, trying to place the analogy. That is. Good, it's survival, Lyra said. And that's good enough. With that she left, the weight of responsibility still heavy on her shoulders but just a bit lighter for having shared it. As they took the briefest of rests, the planet outside continued its assaults, yet something had shifted. Just a bit. A moment of respite, a crack in the armor. It was enough to give them hope, hope that, come what may, they still had one last ace up their sleeve themselves. And if the council couldn't see that, well, Lyra was always up for a good argument. After all, she'd been practicing her whole life. Later, with their nerves frayed and the council waiting, Lyra gathered her team once more. "Okay, folks," she said, her voice a blend of exhaustion and stubborn resolve. "Showtime." They marched back to the dreaded chamber, head held high. If they were going to go down, they were damn well going to go down swinging. As they took their seats, Lyra couldn't help but feel like she was in a scene from a courtroom drama, except the stakes were higher, and the judge was a collection of interstellar bureaucrats with all the mercy of a black hole. "Ambassador Farrows," Drell began, his tone dripping with condescension. "Have you reconsidered your position in light of recent events?" Lyra leaned forward, meeting his gaze with the kind of look that could cut glass. "Counselor Drell," she replied smoothly, "we've considered many things, including whether you're actually an android programmed to hate anything not written in triplicate." A few council members smirked, though Drell just sniffed disdainfully. "Your team's continued occupation of Xylo-7 is untenable." "Funny," Lyra countered. "We were just thinking about how untenable it'd be for you to explain why you let a planet's best hope slip through your fingers." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, and Lyra pressed on, laying out their findings with the kind of fervor only desperation could inspire. "We've discovered a way to communicate with Xylo-7, she explained. "Through human engagement, we're able to alter its responses." "Engagement?" Drell interrupted, skeptical. "Joy," Counselor Muriel chimed in. "Something you might not be familiar with." Drell ignored her, but the point was made. The council was listening now, and Lyra could feel the tide turning. They presented their data, the Joy Analyzer's readings, the changes in Xylo-7's behavior. It was a gamble, but one they had to take. As they finished, silence fell. The council deliberated, their expressions inscrutable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Drell spoke again. "Your findings are intriguing," he admitted grudgingly, "and worth further investigation." Lyra allowed herself a small smile. "Thank you, Counselor. We're eager to continue our work." The decision was a temporary reprieve, a stay of execution, but it was enough, for now. As they left the chamber, Lyra felt a flicker of hope. They'd bought themselves time, and time was all they needed to turn the tables. "Think they'll keep us around?" Muriel asked as they headed down the corridor. Lyra shrugged. "If they don't, they are idiots. And I've got a few more tricks up my sleeve just in case." "Like what?" Finnegan asked, curious. "Like a smile and a can-do attitude," Lyra replied. "And maybe another reactor if you're feeling ambitious." Finnegan grinned. "I've got a few ideas." "Good," Lyra said, feeling the fire in her gut burning bright once more. "We're gonna need all the ideas we can get." As they returned to the lab, ready to face whatever chaos Xylo-7 threw at them next, Lyra couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie, of purpose. They were underdogs, sure, but they were human. Clever, irreverent, and unyielding. And if there was one thing the universe needed to learn, it was never to count the humans out. Not when they had a planet to conquer and a point to prove. And maybe, just maybe, a galaxy to save. The lab smelled like burnt toast and overcooked ambition, comforting, in a way that only a workplace filled with hazardous chemicals and half-baked ideas could be. Lyra leaned against the corner of the table, fingers tapping an irregular rhythm against the cold metal. Her eyes flicked to the holographic projection of Xylo-7, spinning like an off-kilter globe in the center of the room. "All right, team," she said, voice carrying the kind of weary authority that suggested she might have stepped on a Lego this morning. We need fresh ideas, and we need them yesterday. Finnegan, looking more like a mad scientist than usual, peered out from behind a cloud of steam emanating from his latest contraption. I could try channeling joy through soup spoons again, he suggested with a grin that was more manic than hopeful. Pretty sure the last time you did that you turned them into very expensive fire hazards, Muriel pointed out, her voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that could peel paint. Or let's find a new use for sarcasm, added Blix, scales clacking like a broken typewriter. It powers most of our conversations. Only if we could bottle it, Lyra sighed. I'd make a killing. She turned to Crix, who was watching the exchange with the look of a tourist who'd stumbled into a war zone. Any thoughts, Crix? Other than humans are insane. Crix's skin flickered in a pattern that Lyra had come to recognize as contemplative. I believe, he said slowly, you are correct in suggesting emotional interaction is key. Xylo-7 may not comprehend language as we know it, but it responds to stimuli. Great. We've established the planet is basically a giant, moody housecat, Lyra muttered, rolling her eyes. How do we turn that into something useful? Silence crept into the room like an uninvited guest, everyone lost in thought, or at least pretending to be. Then Muriel snapped her fingers. What if joy isn't just a weapon but a way to communicate? Lyra arched an eyebrow. You mean like interplanetary flirtation? Muriel shrugged. Why not? Maybe we need to woo the big rock into liking us, right? Finnegan said, scratching his head. So we're supposed to make Xylo-7 fall in love with us. Just send a bouquet and a nice card, or a bottle of wine, Blix chimed in. Planets love a good vintage, more like a ship full of chocolates and a promise we'll call in the morning, Lyra chuckled, the absurdity of the situation not lost on her. They were on the verge of a breakthrough or at least a breakdown. Either way, it was time to act. Okay, Lyra said, standing straighter, her resolve hardening. We're going to try something new. We're going to put on the biggest, happiest show Xylo-7 has ever seen. Muriel snorted. And if it doesn't work, at least we'll make history as the first people to throw a party for a planet. They worked tirelessly, setting up everything they needed for their plan. The joy analyzer had been rigged to act like a massive emotional amplifier, ready to broadcast human joy across the surface of Xylo-7. The team's emotions were about to become the ultimate playlist, and they were hoping the planet liked what it heard. As they prepared, Lyra glanced at her team. They looked like they'd been through a spin cycle on a washing machine, exhausted, frayed, but somehow still standing. All right, people. Let's make this night one for the history books. We're either going to save the planet or die trying. Those are some inspiring odds, Muriel muttered, adjusting the joy analyzer with a deft hand. I didn't say they were good, Lyra replied. Just that they are the only ones we've got. As the evening loomed, the lab transformed into a strange hybrid of a science fair and a disco. Blix had rigged up a light show that turned the lab into a swirling kaleidoscope of colors, while Crix engineered a sound system that would have made any DJ jealous. It was a madcap attempt to get a planet's attention, and everyone was feeling a bit like they were one step away from insanity. Okay, Lyra said, taking a deep breath. Let's kick this off. Finnegan hit the switch and the joy analyzer whirred to life, sending out waves of emotion. It was like a beacon calling out to Xylo-7 with all the subtlety of a screaming toddler. Anyone else feel ridiculous? Muriel asked, shouting over the pulsing music. Think of it as a cosmic karaoke, Lyra yelled back, throwing her arms wide. The universe is our stage. They danced, laughed, and shared every ridiculous story they could think of. The lab practically vibrated with music and laughter, their joy a tangible force. Remember when Finnegan tried to fix the reactor with duct tape? Muriel shouted, barely keeping a straight face. Hey, duct tape is a legitimate tool. Finnegan protested, trying to keep his dignity intact. To be fair, it did hold for a solid 5 minutes, Blix added, grinning. They kept it up, pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion. And as they did, something incredible happened. The holographic projection of Xylo-7 began to pulse in time with the music, its colors shifting like a mood ring on steroids. "Holy hell," Lyra breathed, watching the display with a mix of disbelief and hope. "Looks like it's listening," Crick said, his skin glowing with excitement. As they continued, the planet's natural defenses seemed to pause, the relentless assaults easing as if Xylo-7 was hesitating, listening, maybe even considering their offer of peace. It was a tentative connection, a fragile bridge built on the back of human emotion. "Keep it going," Lyra urged, her voice barely audible over the noise. "We're getting through." The night wore on, each minute feeling like an hour, but the team didn't relent. They poured everything they had into their efforts, laughing and dancing like their lives depended on it, because they did. Finally, as exhaustion threatened to claim them all, the joy analyzer let out a triumphant chirp, its dial spinning wildly before settling into a steady, reassuring hum. "Well, would you look at that," Finnegan said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We didn't explode," yet Murrow corrected, but even she was smiling. Lyra allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, staring at the holographic display of Xylo-7. It seemed calmer now, its defenses no longer bristling with hostility. "Do you think it worked?" Crix asked, his skin a hopeful shade of green. Lyra shrugged, still catching her breath. "Only one way to find out, but I'd say we've got a fighting chance. They'd done the impossible, or at least the improbable. They'd made contact with a planet, using nothing but the power of joy and sheer human stubbornness." As they collapsed into chairs, the adrenaline finally wearing off, Lyra felt a strange sense of serenity. They'd made progress, and for the first time the future didn't look entirely bleak. "Who knew we'd save the day by throwing a party?" Blix remarked, shaking his head. "Humans are known for their adaptability," Crix noted, "and their peculiar approach to problem-solving." "Yeah, we're basically chaos wrapped in skin," Lyra agreed. "But it's working." They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their thoughts. It was a temporary victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. They'd bought themselves time to figure out a more permanent solution and maybe, just maybe, find a way to coexist with Xylo-7. "Think the Council will believe us?" Muriel asked, breaking the quiet. Lyra chuckled. "Oh, they'll believe us, whether they like it or not." And with that she allowed herself to relax just for a moment. They'd fought hard and they'd earned this respite. As the lab quieted, Lyra felt the weight of their achievement settle over her. They'd survived another day, bought another chance to solve the riddle of Xylo-7, and maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to make peace with the planet that had been their nemesis. One thing was certain, they weren't giving up. They'd come too far, fought too hard. And if Xylo-7 thought it was dealing with a group of weak-willed explorers, it was in for a surprise. Because this team, they were survivors. Resilient, stubborn, and just crazy enough to change the galaxy. Lyra Farrows surveyed the chaos that was now the lab, a blend of post-party wreckage and the aftermath of a science experiment gone horribly right. The joy analyzer sat in the corner, humming like a content cat who'd just finished the canary. "Well, look at that," she said, the words barely audible over the ringing in her ears. "We threw a party for a planet and no one died. I'd call that a success." "No one died yet," Murrow corrected, sprawled across a lab bench with the elegance of roadkill. "Give it a minute." Blix, perched on a stack of what could have once been important research papers, squinted at the glowing holographic projection of Xylo-7. "Do we know if it's actually happy or just really confused?" "Maybe both," Lyra replied, rubbing her temples. "I'm not sure if we've made peace or just bewildered it into submission." Gractal, the council representative, entered the lab, looking like he just walked into a zoo that had recently discovered pyrotechnics. His eyes widened as he took in the scene. "What in the galaxies happened here?" "Team bonding exercise," Lyra said, waving a hand dismissively. "We figured if Xylo-7 wanted us dead, it'd have done it by now. So we tried joy." "Joy," Gractal repeated, as if she just suggested they appease the planet with a nice Chianti and fava beans. Yes, and before you ask, we didn't just pipe in elevator music and call it a day, Merle half snarled, adjusting herself on the bench. There was a whole playlist involved, mostly disco, Blix added, tail flicking lazily. Planets love disco. Gractol pinched the bridge of his nose, clearly regretting his life choices that had led him here, and the council's supposed to believe this worked. That you've placated a hostile, sentient planet with a party, Lyra shrugged. It's either that or we tell them we solved the problem with duct tape and wishful thinking. Take your pick. Meanwhile, Crix was fiddling with the remains of what had been an ambitious tower of empty snack packets. I must admit, he said thoughtfully, the concept of joy still eludes me, but it appears effective. Think of it as emotional bribery, Merle supplied, her smirk audible. We made the planet so happy it forgot it hated us. Gractol shook his head, the weight of the council's impending review hanging over him like a particularly vengeful storm cloud. This is unprecedented. You'll need to present this achievement to the council. Ah, the council, Finnegan piped up, surfacing from beneath a pile of tinsel that had somehow appeared during the festivities. Where scientific breakthroughs go to die, or get strangled with red tape, Blix said. And not the fun kind. Lyra shot them both a look. We'll need to put together a presentation. Something to convince them we're not just the galactic equivalent of a clown car. Good luck with that, Merle said. Our methods make a clown car look like a luxury liner. Gractol attempted to regain some semblance of authority, straightening his robe with a sigh. You have until the council convenes tomorrow. I suggest you prepare something. Palatable. Lyra echoed, raising an eyebrow. What do you suggest, adding a garnish? Maybe a nice vinaigrette, or just serve it with a side of disbelief, Merle quipped. They love that. As Gractol exited, likely to find a dark corner in which to question his existence, Lyra turned to her team. All right, let's get to work. We'll need something impressive to convince them we're not just mad scientists with a penchant for parties. Finnegan laughed, a sound that was a little too close to a cackle for comfort. But we are mad scientists with a penchant for parties. Lyra rubbed her eyes. And that's what makes us unique. Now, let's figure out how to sell the council on the idea that we saved the planet with joy and not just sheer luck. Crix watched the proceedings with the air of someone observing a particularly lively chess match. If I understand human politics correctly, this should be amusing. Amusing isn't the word I'd use, Lyra replied dryly. Terrifying, maybe. But hey, at least we're good at blundering through things. The team set to work, cobbling together a presentation with the skill of a patchwork quilt. Mismatched, colorful, but somehow functional. They had the rest of the night to prepare, and if they were lucky, they'd emerge with something that wouldn't get them laughed out of the council chamber. As the hours dragged on, the lab buzzed with activity. Holograms flickered to life, charts were drawn and redrawn, and at least one paper airplane was launched across the room in a fit of frustration. You know, Blix said, watching the chaos with a bemused expression, if we pull this off, we might just go down in history. Or infamy, Merle countered, arms crossed. Is there really a difference? Depends on who's writing the history books, Lyra said, surveying the madness with a weary smile. But if we're going to make fools of ourselves, we might as well do it in style. The council chamber loomed large and imposing, its cold metal walls echoing with the murmur of hushed conversations. Representatives from across the galaxy had gathered, each one eager to witness the outcome of humanity's bizarre experiment. Lyra stood at the front of the chamber, flanked by her ragtag team. They were an odd bunch, but they were hers, and she wouldn't trade them for all the competent scientists in the universe. Remember, she whispered, voice low enough to avoid detection by the overeager microphones positioned around the room. We're here to convince them we know what we're doing. So, no one mentioned the duct tape, or the disco ball, Blix added, scales gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Or the part where we almost blew ourselves up, Finnegan chimed in, grinning like a kid with a new toy. Lyra took a deep breath. Stepping forward as Counselor Drell, a figure as charismatic as a wet towel, called the meeting to order. Representatives of the Galactic Concord, we gather to discuss the human contingent's progress on Xylo-7. Drell's voice was monotone, designed to lull even the most caffeine-infused diplomat into a stupor. Lyra had to fight the urge to yawn. We understand you've made significant advances, Drell continued, clearly skeptical. Lyra smiled, a gesture that could have been called friendly if one squinted hard enough. Indeed, Counselor, we've discovered that Xylo-7 responds positively to human emotional output, specifically joy. A ripple of disbelief spread through the chamber like a bad smell. Council members exchanged glances, some intrigued, others outright dismissive. Joy, Drell repeated, as if the word tasted like ash. Yes, Lyra said, maintaining her calm despite the urge to throttle someone. We held an event, a celebration if you will, and were able to observe a measurable decrease in the planet's aggressive behavior. The holographic projection of Xylo-7 spun lazily in the center of the room, its colors shifting in a subtle dance that seemed to hold everyone's attention. And you believe this? Celebration is a sustainable solution, Drell asked, skepticism thick enough to choke on. We believe it's a start, Muriel interjected, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. It's better than the alternative, explosions and body bags. Drell frowned, clearly unimpressed with her bluntness. And how do you propose this method be replicated on a wider scale? Finnegan leaned in, his grin practically reaching his ears. Simple. We keep Xylo-7 entertained. Not so different from dealing with a particularly grumpy toddler. The chamber erupted in a mix of laughter and outrage, the absurdity of the situation breaking the tension. Even Gractal seemed momentarily amused. Lyra seized the opportunity, stepping forward with renewed confidence. We're proposing a series of controlled experiments. By exposing Xylo-7 to various emotional stimuli, we believe we can establish a reliable form of communication. Blix added, think of it as diplomacy with a twist. Less paperwork, more results. Drell mulled this over, clearly torn between amusement and incredulity. And what if you fail, we'll improvise, Lyra replied, her tone a challenge. As we always do, the council members whispered among themselves, the chamber filled with the rustle of robes and the tapping of fingers. It was a waiting game now, one that tested their patience and resolve in equal measure. Finally, Drell nodded, albeit grudgingly. Very well. You will have the council's provisional support. Continue your research and report back with your findings. Lyra exhaled, the weight of the world lifting just a fraction. They'd done it. They'd convinced the most skeptical body in the galaxy to give them a chance, and all it took was a little bit of insanity. As the meeting adjourned, Lyra turned to her team, a grin spreading across her face. Well, looks like we live to fight another day. Muriel smirked, arms folded. Or at least long enough to throw another party. Here's to us, Blix said, raising an imaginary glass. The craziest bunch of misfits this side of the galaxy, Crix, ever the observant one, regarded them with something akin to admiration. You humans are endlessly fascinating, and you aliens, Lyra replied, are endlessly patient. As they left the council chamber, the future seemed a little less daunting. They'd faced down impossible odds and emerged, if not victorious, then certainly not defeated. Do you think we'll ever understand Xylo-7? Finnegan mused, trailing behind the group. Lyra considered this, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Probably not, but we'll keep trying, because that's what we do. And with that they stepped into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. After all, they were only human, but sometimes that was more than enough. The echoes of their footsteps faded as the team exited the council chamber, the oppressive weight of the galaxy's most unsmiling bureaucrats finally behind them. Lyra imagined she could feel the chill lifting from her shoulders, though that could just be the caffeine crash setting in. Hell, maybe she was just imagining things again, like competence, sustainable solutions, or the day Gractal learns to smile. Her team walked with the swagger of people who had just pulled off the impossible, Or maybe that was just the swagger of people who had danced with death and lived to tell the tale. Either way, they'd earned a solid 10 minutes of feeling good about themselves. Muriel nudged her. Think we should celebrate that we didn't get thrown out on our asses? Why not? Lyra replied, her lips curling into a smirk. We've got disco balls and duct tape. We can whip up a party in no time. Finnegan, ever the eccentric with a penchant for danger, chuckled. I can think of a few reactors we could set off to really get the party started. No, Lyra said, her voice firm. We're sticking to things that don't explode, at least not immediately. As long as we're getting a break, Blix interjected, his scales catching the artificial light with a muted shimmer. I'm tired of saving the galaxy. I've got hobbies, like what? Muriel asked, raising an eyebrow. Otherwise, I'm just imagining you staring at a wall for hours, Sudoku. It's calming, Blix replied, with a casual shrug that seemed almost alien in its nonchalance. Lyra had to bite back a laugh. You do you, Blix. Just keep your numbers straight and your explosions minimal. As they made their way through the sterile corridors of the council building, Lyra found herself reflecting on how they'd gotten here. It was a hell of a journey, filled with more insanity than she could count on both hands. But here they were, halfway to convincing an entire galaxy that humanity had something to offer besides cheap thrills and questionable life choices. Crix fell in step beside her, his eyes a mix of curiosity and something like admiration. Your kind is perplexing. We get that a lot, Lyra replied, a touch of pride in her voice. What's got your circuits crossed now, Joy, Crix said, the word still tasting new and strange. This concept, it's not something we experience the same way. Yet it seems to wield such power. Yeah, well, humans are weird like that. We can be a mess of contradictions, Lyra said, shrugging. We hurt, we laugh, we dance in the face of oblivion. And sometimes, just sometimes, we make things better. Crix considered this, nodding slowly. I think I'm beginning to understand. It's not just about survival for you, nope, Lyra agreed. It's about living. And occasionally about throwing one hell of a party. They reached their makeshift command center, a glorified broom closet with delusions of grandeur, and Lyra plopped down in a chair that squeaked in protest. The room was a chaos of paper and electronics, but it was their chaos. All right, folks, she announced, waving her arms like a conductor before an orchestra of misfits. Let's debrief. What did we learn today? That the council is as exciting as watching paint dry, Muriel quipped, leaning back in her chair with a satisfied sigh. That we might not be completely insane, Blix offered, his tone a mix of sarcasm and genuine belief. We learned that Gractol might actually have a sense of humor, Finnegan added, causing a ripple of laughter through the room. Lyra grinned, and that we're onto something real. Xylo-7 isn't just a hostile rock out to kill us, it's a grumpy friend who doesn't know how to ask for a hug. A very big, very unpredictable friend, Muriel warned, though her eyes sparkled with the thrill of the challenge. But a friend nonetheless, Lyra insisted, and that's something we can work with. We're not just scientists here, we're diplomats, ambassadors of joy and chaos, ambassadors of madness, more like, Muriel muttered, although it was clear she didn't mind the title. Their conversation was interrupted by the shrill beep of Lyra's communicator, the electronic voice of Counselor Drell crackling through the static. Lyra Farrows, the council would like a preliminary report by the end of the week. You are to include all relevant findings. Guess they want to make sure we're not just making this up as we go, Lyra mused, tapping off the communicator with a practiced flick. They may be skeptical, Blix said, voice low, but they're interested. That's something, Lyra agreed. And it means we've got work to do. They set to work, diving into the data they'd gathered from the party. It was a mess. Graphs that looked like they'd been drawn by a drunken spider, numbers that danced just out of reach, and theories that were more fantasy than science. But they were working with it, building a picture of Xylo-7 that was more than just a threat. Hours passed, punctuated by the occasional groan of frustration or snarky comment. It was exhausting work, but it was theirs, and that made it worthwhile. Finally, as the clock ticked toward what could generously be called morning, Lyra sat back with a sigh. All right, we've got something resembling a report. Time to get some shut-eye before we take on the universe again, or before the universe takes us on, Finnegan joked, his eyes bleary but still twinkling with mischief. As the team began to disperse, Lyra lingered in the doorway, watching them with a strange mix of affection and exasperation. They were an odd bunch for sure, but they were hers, and together they might just change the galaxy. Crix paused beside her, his presence almost reassuring in its steadiness. "Do you think they'll listen?" he asked, his voice soft. "They'd better," Lyra replied with a smirk. "If not, we'll just have to throw another party. Maybe with more disco." Crix repeated, the word foreign and funny in his mouth. Lyra grinned, feeling a surge of defiance. "Yeah, we made it work once. Who's to say we can't do it again?" As the lights dimmed and the lab fell silent, Lyra allowed herself a rare moment of hope. The road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time she felt like they were on the right path. They had a chance, no matter how slim, of making a difference. And for now, that was enough. Asterisk, 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 the following days were a blur of activity. With the Council's provisional support, Lyra's team was granted access to resources they'd only dreamed of. It was a bureaucratic miracle, the kind that usually involved divine intervention or a suspiciously large donation. Gractal, reluctantly impressed, even managed a smile, though it looked more like he'd bitten into something sour. "The Council is willing to explore your proposal further, Pharaohs. But do not mistake this for full approval. Wouldn't dream of it," Lyra replied, grinning like a Cheshire cat. "We're just happy not to be tossed out an airlock." Gractal huffed, the corners of his mouth twitching. "Yes. Well, continue your work. We'll be watching." It was progress, slow and hesitant, but progress nonetheless. Humanity's relationship with Xylo-7 and with the Galactic Concord was evolving, one improbable step at a time. As they delved deeper into their research, Lyra found herself in frequent meetings with representatives from other planets, their curiosity piqued by the peculiar success of the human contingent. Some were skeptical, others outright dismissive, but a few were cautiously optimistic. One such meeting involved a particularly haughty ambassador from a species resembling peacocks with delusions of grandeur. "Your methods are unconventional," he sniffed, his feathers ruffling with disdain. Lyra shrugged, unfazed. "Unconventional is just another word for effective." The ambassador regarded her for a long moment before inclining his head. "Perhaps there is merit in your madness. Coming from you, I'll take that as a compliment," Lyra replied, a grin flashing across her face. Back on Xylo-7, the planet seemed to be responding to their efforts, its hostility tempered by the strange new relationship it found with its human guests. There were setbacks, of course, times when the planet reacted unpredictably, reminding them all that it was still very much in control. But the trend was positive, the planet's defenses gradually relaxing as it learned to trust these strange new caretakers. The team's reputation began to spread, their success a beacon of hope in a galaxy often mired in cynicism and distrust. Other planets, once wary of human interference, started to reconsider their stance, opening the door for potential alliances and collaborations. Lyra stood at the helm of this new venture, her leadership challenged but unwavering. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with potential pitfalls and opportunities alike, but it was a road worth traveling. As she surveyed the bustling activity in their lab, she couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. They were making a difference, proving that humanity was more than just a fleeting spark in the cosmic night. They were resilient, adaptable, and, most importantly, capable of change. Muriel, passing by with a stack of data pads, caught her expression and smirked. "Already planning the next big party?" Lyra laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound. "Maybe. But let's get through this one first." Always the pragmatist, Muriel teased, though her eyes were warm with camaraderie. "Well, someone's got to keep us grounded," Lyra replied, though she knew as well as anyone that they were all flying by the seat of their pants. As the days turned to weeks, the team continued their work, driven by a shared vision and a collective stubbornness that refused to quit. They'd faced down their doubts, their fears, and a galaxy that seemed hell-bent on testing them at every turn. And through it all, they'd emerged stronger, their bond forged in the fires of chaos and laughter. It wasn't always easy and it wasn't always fun, but it was theirs. A story of unlikely heroes and extraordinary triumphs in the face of cosmic indifference. For Lyra and her team, the journey was far from over. But they were ready. They had to be. After all, the universe was a big place, and there were still plenty of parties left to throw.